Hi, this video to demonstrate the reporting facilities that would be Microsoft reports within EMax and DataOrigins. Okay. Now, for data purposes, I've got some time and attendance transactions in here. I've got 5,500 of them, just so there's a fair amount of data in there. And I'm going to go ahead and build a report to, let's say, total these up. So I want the ability to do, one of the things I want to show is to what we call list as source. Now it's actually now called filter from list, just to make it clearer. So you filter this list and then the data gets passed to the report. Now to build the reports we're using this, which is SQL Server 2012 Report Builder 3. You can also use Report Builder 2, which is SQL Server 2008. Some of the features inside Report Builder 3 will not work. There's only a few of them, but map services will not work from within EMax, unless you place them on a Microsoft report server. Okay. Now the way EMax works with these reports, it actually does not require a Microsoft report server in order to run them. So normally with Microsoft reports, you would place these on a report server, and then you would use a URL in order to contact the report server and display these reports, and they are rendered in HTML. But so that users don't require a Microsoft report server, what we're doing is extracting the XML out of these files that get created here, the report files, and from that creating the connection to the database and running the reports inside the report viewer. From a technical point of view, there's no difference other than the fact that you don't need a report server, but you can run them on a report server if you want. So if you need things like map services, and I think there's a couple of other features that are built into this that you can only run on the new version of SQL Server 2012 reporting services, then you can still do that. Okay, so the reports. The first thing we have to do is define a data source. Now. In these reports you can have multiple data sources, which is quite nice. So you can, instead of having to write sub-reports, you can actually bring data in from multiple sources. It's quite a nice feature. We are going to go ahead and create an embedded data source. These shared connections, you can create report models. You can also bring these in from report servers, but we're not going to bother with that. So we'll just build a straightforward embedded connection, and I'm going to choose EMax demo. Okay, that. Okay, so that's us got a data source. The data sets, once again, you can have multiple data sets. Just think of these as queries. That's because that's what they actually are. They are SQL queries. So if I add a data set, and I'm going to use that data source, and we'll call it TA trans, and query designer, tables, so we're going to want the start, the end, normal time, possibly where there's any errors, time and a half double, that'll do. And what we'll do is we'll also bring in the employee details. Now to bring in the employee is actually a contact, so we want the employee's name, and if we want the employee number, we'll need to bring it in from that table. Okay, so by ticking these, that creates a list of all the fields that I want to bring across. Now you can actually see this query getting built up. Sorry, it won't actually work until I put the relationships in. Take off auto detect, and we can start adding relationships manually. So I'll go from TA transactions to employees, left outer join, double click to add the fields. So from employee ID to the ID on the employee table, and we'll add another one from the employees table to the contacts table, left outer, double click, add the field. So from the employee table ID to the contacts table ID, it's a one-to-one. Okay, we can click on that then now, and you'll see that that is actually an SQL select statement that it builds up. Fairly straightforward. You can actually edit these manually, which is quite powerful. This graphical query designer is quite clever and works pretty well. You can put filters in here. It's basically the where statement. So that's the select statement, that's the joins, and that's the where statement. Fairly straightforward. It doesn't allow for things like ORs on the filters if you want to do that. So all these filters are ANDed together. If you want to put parentheses in and do ORs, then you can go to the text edit and actually just go ahead and do it. And you can run them and see a list of the data that it brings in. So it's got some nice features in that respect. Okay, so there's our data set. Now, displaying data in table formats in this type of report, you just insert a table, and then we'll put the employee number, employee name, start, and normal errors. And see what that looks like. Okay, so we could go ahead and do some formatting on this in the same sort of way that you're able to do it in most report writers. Now, actually, funny thing about this is that time spans in the database are stored as seconds. So in EMax, these are time spans, and they're displayed in the format of days, a decimal place, then hours, a colon, minutes, colon, seconds. Yeah, but the way they're actually stored in the database, the reason for that is for precision. When you try to multiply out times, it gets very difficult. Now this actually goes to seconds to a decimal place, so you can have like 0.25 of a second. That is required for some customers who've got extremely high volume parts with extremely low runtimes. So the database has been set up so that time spans they're actually stored in the database physically as decimal seconds to 3 decimal places, you can see. Now, obviously that's not what we want on here. We want to display that as decimal hours, let's say. So we can quite simply go ahead and change that to an expression and divide that by 3600. Same with this one. So I'm not going to go into the full training course on how to use Microsoft report builder. There's loads of tutorials online. You can also just mess about with it, and right clicking on fields, inserting tables. List is quite good. It basically allows you a free-form placement on a per record basis. Matrices, tabs. It's also got sort of KPI indicators and such like, so it's fairly nice functionality there. Okay, and let's put a report title in here. So run that. There we go. So that's those times coming in as decimal hours. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now you'll see these are RDL files. There is another format called RDLC, which are the normal type of report you would use to run locally on a machine that are not on a report server. Report Builder is not compatible with them, which is why I'm allowing you to use to save RDL files, and then DataOrigins in the background is actually sucking the information out of them and reconfiguring the RDL file to an RDLC file in the background so that it can be displayed locally. So we'll go ahead and save that as TA. Okay, now in EMax, to be able to print from anywhere, you hit the print button and you'll get a list of reports that are available to you. As you can see, I don't have any in there, so we can go ahead and add a new one. And I know I don't have the reports, so I'm going to add it. So we'll just put TA transactions, location was in documents, I believe. That's that one there. And the report type is Microsoft. Print all preview layout on list. Now this filter from list, I'm not going to tick that yet. I'll show you how that works in a second. But I'll just show you this report actually working. Now you can actually set up your column chooser in here. So you may actually go into title, not the location, and probably not the user, because that's always going to be the user that's logged in. Okay, so there's your actual report. You can double click on it, and there you have it. So 324 pages, fairly fast. That's 5,500 records, as you can see there that it's loading in. So I'll go ahead and I'll just close that down. The way that that's running as it stands is it's just displaying all the data from that data set. Now what I will say is this data set does not have to be, the data source does not have to be the database that you want to run the report on from in here. When you run a report, it checks for the data sources and actually updates that data source to be your current connection within EMax. That allows us to build reports on databases within the EMax organization, give them out to our customers, and they can run them on their database. So although it's pointing at an EMax database on my server, it can be run on any machine. Okay. Now, in order to make this work as bound to list, which is quite an important aspect of our reports, quite a powerful piece of functionality, so customers can effectively filter in here and run all sorts of filters, so they could see time and attendance transactions for a given employee between a period of time, time and attendance transactions where there's potentially an error, so the duration is greater than let's say 12 hours because nobody's allowed to work more than that. They want to see time and attendance transactions for an entire department, and on and on and on. If we were to write an individual report to cater for that, for every single scenario they could possibly come up with, we would be writing hundreds of reports to do the same job. So what we allow is users can filter this list down to whatever they want and then run a report, and it only works on the data that's in this list. Okay, so to do that, quite simply, in the reports we just add a filter to the table that we want to filter. Go back to here, and here's the filters here. We'll add a new filter, and we're going to choose ID is any of, and put a parameter in. Okay, and that's it. Now what that did was it created a parameter up here called ID, and if you go to the query, and edit as text, you'll see it quite simply put in a where transaction to say where that transaction is in that parameter. Okay, now obviously when you've got that in there, when you try and run your report inside here, it's going to ask you for the ID. Okay, and unless you know some IDs to put in here, when you hit view report, you're not going to get any data. Yeah, so it's going to return 0, and that's to be expected. But if we go into EMax and let's see, I'm just going to edit that report, and we tick this filter from list. Okay, that effectively makes it the same as a bounty list report. So what it's going to do is it's going to pass the IDs. Now this works in a slightly different way than we used to do this. What we used to do in RM6 was we'd actually take the data from this list and we would pass all the data across to the reports, crystal reports that being, and we would have a table inside a crystal report that would get filled with that data. That worked well. It has its problems, but with the new version, it's all very different, and has had to have a rethink about how that works. We cannot pass the data to the report because we cannot control the fact that the user may not have all that data and may have this all completely unticked, and that's the only data that's in that list. Now, because the new version works in a way that the only data that comes across into that list is the fields that you have got, the columns that you have selected. Okay, it's not loading all the other data in the background. It hasn't come across the network, so this application does not have it to pass to the report locally. So what it does is it passes, if I go into column chooser, you see the show ID fields, the ID field. Okay, you cannot untick that. You must always have the ID field. It's in there, it's hidden. You can show it if you want. You can go to format columns and double click on that, choose as visual, save that, and you'll see there's the IDs. Okay, so what the system actually does when you print a bound to list report or a filter from list report is it passes all the IDs that are visible in this list to the report, and then as you can see it passes them as that parameter there, which then gets passed into that parameter, and it just basically says if the ID is in that bunch of IDs, then allow it to be displayed. Okay, so it's fairly straightforward how it works, and quite simple to set up, and let's just make sure that we saved that and see if it actually works. So if I print that, there we go. So that wasn't bad speed-wise, considering that that was a bounty list with 5,500 items in it. Oops, sorry. So not too bad at all. Now, let's see if we can prove that it actually is working. So I'll take a couple of these and I'll just tick a couple of boxes on that one. In fact, I could take that many and multi-set them. Tick error. Okay, and then I'm just going to filter for just the ones that I've got error ticked. Okay, now you can see that if I was to do column chooser and put the error on there, you'll see that those ones are the ones with an error. Okay, so if I print that same report, then the only records we're going to get are those ones there that have an error. Okay, so there you have it. That is Microsoft SQL Server reports working in DataOrigins and EMax, and bound to list reports, which are now called filter from list. Just makes it a bit more intuitive for users working from inside there. Okay, thank you for listening.